You're standing in line. But this isn't a theme park or a concert. This is a line on Mount Everest. You're in the Death Zone, 8,000 meters above sea level and waiting for your turn at the Hillary Step, a jagged ledge barely wide enough for one person. You don't die because you're moving. You die because you're forced to stop. Imagine standing still at 8,000 meters, clipped to a single rope, watching your oxygen tick down, like a timer you can't pause. The line in front of you doesn't move. Every minute steals heat, clarity, and options. 3 climbers reached the top, believing the hardest part was over. Then, the waiting began. This isn't a tale about summits. It's about the few frozen meters where everything slows and time turns dangerous. Donald Cash, Kalpana, Das, Robin Fischer, same line, same trap. It looked unreal. A queue to the top of the world, one thin rope, one way up, one way down. Dozens of climbers stacked on a knife-edge ridge where the air barely counts as air. The jam wasn't an accident. A tight weather window slammed hundreds of permits into the same 2 or 3 nights. Everyone moved at midnight. Single-file traffic at 8,700 meters turns minutes into hours. This is how a mountain becomes a time trap. Not with avalanches, not with a dramatic fall, with a quiet standstill in air that erases strength and steals minutes you didn't plan to spend. And in that standstill, 3 stories begin to tilt. First, a 55-year-old from Utah who finally touched his dream and then felt the world dim on the way down. He'd chased this for years. A dad from Utah, tech job, big grin, bigger goals, the 7 summits. Everest was the last box. That morning, he reached the top and threw his arms up like a kid who'd just touched the finish tape. For a few minutes, the world was perfect. A clean horizon, nothing higher, the quest finally done. Then the clock came back. On the ridge, people were stacked shoulder to shoulder. You can't pass, you can't sprint. You just breathe through a mask and wait for the line to move while the air quietly steals your margin. Don stood where the rope said, "Stand," the wind prying at every layer, the minutes adding weight you can't see. Guides watched him closely, little checks, the kind you do when you know the mountain's still in play. How's the grip? Is the voice steady? Are the steps clean or getting wobbly? Fatigue up high doesn't arrive like a crash. It slides in. First the shoulders drop, then the steps shorten. Then a sentence trails off midway. The whole body starts bargaining for easier ground. He had the summit photo, but the work was the descent. The part nobody schools you for in office life or weekend training runs. Down means patience, precision, and a mind that can still do math when the mask hisses and the fingers stop listening. They tried to keep him moving, but the ridge was crowded and slow is the enemy here. Stopping to swap a bottle costs time, not swapping costs clarity. A guide can hand you oxygen. A guide can talk you through the next anchor. A guide can't change the fact that you're standing still at a height where even strong engines sputter. Somewhere after the top, his lights dimmed. Not a dramatic collapse, more like power fading room by room. The team responded the way good teams do. Mask checks, extra O2, shoulder support, calm voices against the wind. They fought for each step, while the crowd ahead jammed the rope and the cold kept the meter running. Above 8,000 meters, just a minute is never just a minute. Don died in line. He wasn't reckless, he was human, thrilled, spent, and suddenly asked to pay interest on every pause the line had forced on him all night. Dreams make you push, cues make you wait. Put those together up here, and the margin shrinks to almost nothing. His family remembers the smile, the stubborn hope, the way he set a goal and wouldn't let it go. That part matters. You can honor a life and still be honest about the risk. Up here, the celebration can cost more than the climb. He proved that ordinary people can hit extraordinary marks. The tragedy was the delay that made the return feel farther than the summit. But the line did not just take Don. Another climber, chasing the same thin band of sky a day later, found her victory tangled in the very same line. Kalpana didn't stumble into Everest. She'd chased big peaks for years, long before it was fashionable in her corner of India. Friends called her driven, critics called her stubborn. She wore both like armor. After an earlier Everest success, she came back determined to stand there again. Same mountain, different season, a chance to prove the first time wasn't luck. Her summit day slid straight into the choke points everyone feared. The queue stretched from the south summit toward the top, a single file of headlamps and frosted masks. You don't argue with that line. You clip in, you wait, and you calculate. Oxygen in the tank, distance to the next anchor, warmth bleeding out of your hands 1 minute at a time. It's a quiet kind of debt that builds while nothing seems to be happening. She made the top. She really did. The second victory often feels lighter than the first, like returning to a place you've only seen in dreams. But the descent refused to play along. The same crowd that had stalled the push now jammed the way down. Tiny stops turned into 5-minute stands. 5 minutes turned into 20. Every wait dulled the edge that climbers rely on for small, life-preserving choices. Where to step, when to clip, when to swap a bottle, when to ask for help before pride gets loud. Somewhere near the balcony, fatigue didn't just knock, it moved in. Guides and teammates checked her mask, urged her onward, tried to turn minutes into movement. But hours in thin air don't hand back what they take. At altitude, you don't crash so much as fade, and the line around you keeps its own cold schedule. Kalpana fell victim to that. She had the will, she had the experience. What she didn't have was time lost to a human bottleneck where the world's highest mountain becomes a waiting room. Back home, people knew her as the woman who wouldn't let go of a dream. That's still true. The unfair part is how a single crowded window can turn persistence into risk. She proved that ambition isn't reserved for the usual places or faces. She pushed, she endured, she reached the roof of the world, again. And then the same thing that lifted her, belief, ran into the one thing you can't negotiate up there, a clock that only runs one way. But that wasn't the whole story. Another climber died in that very same traffic line. Fischer read the room before most people did. Days earlier, he'd posted that a single route to the top meant delays could turn deadly. He even pushed his summit bid to May 25th, hoping to miss the crowd. The gamble made sense, unless everyone else tried the same thing. They did. He reached the top that morning and started down into the same squeeze that had haunted the week. One rope, one file, no fast lane. Altitude turns simple pauses into real losses. Warmth, clarity, oxygen. Somewhere just below the summit ridge, his body began to shut the door. Teams nearby reported a collapse on descent, around 150 meters below the top, so close in distance, so far in time. What makes his story sting is the foresight. He wasn't blind to the risk, he called it. But prediction doesn't change physics when you're trapped behind a dozen frosted masks at 8,700 meters. The clock still runs, the wind still skims strength, and each stop drains the tank. Officials later confirmed he died high on the ridge during that crowded window. Another name added to a season that showed how a queue can be as dangerous as a storm. Robin wasn't chasing fame. He wanted the challenge and the clean line on a map that says you stood where the world ends. He got there. Then the descent asked for minutes he didn't have. That's the pattern this story keeps revealing. Not just altitude, but waiting at altitude. Now, let's step back and break down why standing still up there hits harder than any climb. Movement keeps you warm. Stillness steals it. In the death zone, that's the whole equation. When you stop, your core cools, your hands stiffen, and your brain gets stingy with oxygen. Decision-making slows. Tiny tasks, clipping a carabiner, swapping a cylinder, clearing an iced mask, turn into puzzles. The longer you stand, the more the body burns through what little it has left. Cold, hypoxia, and fatigue stack their hands, and the jam makes sure you can't play yours. That's the trap. But the mountain doesn't create traffic by itself. Everest has a single-file highway above 8,000 meters, one fixed rope for up and down in most choke points. Add a small weather window and a record crowd, and everyone aims for the same night. No passing lane, no alternative route at the crux, just a slow-moving chain of people attached to the same lifeline. Commercial pressure adds weight. Teams want clients to summit in the safe window. Operators herd toward the best forecast. A few slower climbers in the wrong place can stall dozens behind them. One stuck glove, one frozen jumar, one mask icing. The rope becomes a standstill. Guides and Sherpas do heroic work, but they're working inside this system. They can carry Sparrow 2, fix masks, push pace where safe, but they can't widen the ridge or hand you fresh minutes. When a crowd forms above 8,500 meters, even the strongest team is negotiating physics, not just logistics. But after all, some choices still tilt the odds. You can't control the crowd, but you can protect your margin. It starts with a turnaround time you set in camp and honor on the ridge, even when the summit is close enough to taste. Oxygen is leverage, not a crutch. Keep the flow as low as you can while moving. Nudge it only when thinking blurs, because a clear head fixes problems faster than a roaring valve. Plan for choke points so you arrive a little earlier or later than the herd. Shifting by half an hour can save you from standing still for 2. Guard your hands like they're mission critical. Warm hands clip cleanly, and clean clips keep you moving. If your steps shorten or you catch yourself searching for words, say it out loud then, not 10 anchors later. Early help costs less time than late rescue. Leave a small gap to the boots in front, so when the line pulses forward, you're ready to move, not tangled on their heels. And when pride starts arguing with the plan, let the plan win. None of this guarantees a safe descent for anyone, but each choice buys seconds, and seconds become minutes, the only currency that spends well above 8,000 meters. Don Cash wasn't collecting photos. He was finishing a promise to himself. Kalpana Das wasn't chasing applause. She was proving that persistence belongs to anyone who claims it. Robin Fischer wasn't naive. He read the risk and still stepped into the arena. They reached the roof of the world. Then the clock, not the climb, closed in. Everest will always be high, cold, and honest. The ridge won't widen for us. Weather won't wait. The only variable we own up there is time. When to go, when to pause, when to turn. The 2019 jam made that brutally clear. Waiting in thin air is more dangerous than moving through it. If you were holding the rope at the last bottleneck, would you choose a freer mountain with more risk or a safer mountain that fewer people can touch? And if it were your summit day, half an hour from the top, the line barely moving, would you turn around?